Be honest. When someone you know is struggling financially, maybe they're deep in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, or just never seem to get ahead, offers you advice about saving, spending, or managing money, isn't there a part of you that immediately dismisses it? They don't have money, you think. What could they possibly teach me about getting or keeping it? We instinctively look for financial guidance from those who appear to have figured it out, from the wealthy, the successful. We assume that having money automatically qualifies you to explain how to manage it, and conversely, that not having money disqualifies your perspective entirely. But what if this pervasive bias blinds us to a different kind of wisdom? What if the most honest, grounded, and insightful perspectives on money sometimes come precisely from those who live closest to its sharpest edges? We operate under a powerful societal script that equates financial net worth with personal worth and financial success with financial intelligence. The logic seems simple. If you have money, you must know what you're doing. If you don't, you must not. This creates a hierarchy of perceived credibility where someone managing billions is assumed to hold universal financial truths, while someone managing a minimum wage budget is presumed to have nothing valuable to teach. This bias is understandable. We want advice that seems to lead to the desired outcome. But reaching the peak of the mountain doesn't always mean you intimately understand the treacherous valleys, the hidden pitfalls, and the sheer grit required just to survive at base camp when you start with nothing. Consider the different kinds of knowledge that exist around money. There's a strategic, theoretical knowledge often held by financial advisors, investors, and the wealthy, understanding market dynamics, optimizing complex portfolios, leveraging capital, navigating sophisticated tax codes. This is undeniably valuable for wealth building and management at a certain scale. But there is also tactical, survival knowledge learned in the trenches, how to make a tiny food budget last, how to identify and avoid predatory lending traps, how to stretch resources creatively, how to distinguish absolute needs from wants under immense pressure, how to navigate bureaucracy to access safety nets. This is expertise forged in the crucible of scarcity. Then there's the wisdom gleaned from failure and hardship, understanding the true, non-monetary cost of debt, the emotional toll of financial instability, the resilience required to keep going after setbacks, the painful lessons learned from mistakes made out of desperation or ignorance. This is a depth of understanding about the impact of money or lack thereof that someone who has always been comfortable may never possess. Finally, there's a potentially different perspective on enough and contentment. When you've lived with less or lost what you had, your understanding of what truly contributes to happiness and security might shift dramatically, prioritizing relationships, experiences, or simple stability over relentless accumulation or material possessions. I came across a story online that challenged my own biases about where financial wisdom resides. A user shared that they had always sought advice from conventionally successful people, mentors, wealthy relatives, but felt like their advice, while technically sound for growth, never fully addressed the grinding anxiety and fear of scarcity they carried from their own less privileged background. One day, they were talking to an older relative, someone who had worked minimum wage jobs her whole life, lived simply, never owned home, but always seemed grounded and calm. The user, out of exasperation, asked her, "How did you do it? How did you live on so little and not lose your mind worrying about money?" The relative didn't offer stock market tips or budgeting apps. Instead, she talked about learning the difference between needs and wants when needs were scarce, the peace found in gratitude for having just enough, the strength of community support that money couldn't buy, and the painful but liberating acceptance that some things, like owning a house in their city, were simply not going to happen, allowing her to focus her energy elsewhere. She spoke about avoiding debt like the plague because she'd seen how it destroyed lives, not from place of judgment, but from lived experience of its crushing weight. The user wrote that this conversation, devoid of jargon or investment strategies, offered more genuine peace and practical resilience than years of advice on maximizing returns. It was wisdom born of navigating the storm, not just charting the calm seas. This story highlights the honest perspectives that can emerge from scarcity. People without money often have a visceral, lived understanding of systemic barriers. The reality that hard work doesn't always equal fair pay, that unexpected illness can wipe out years of struggle, that access opportunities requires resources they don't have. They understand, in a way someone who has never faced it cannot, the psychological burden of debt shame, the impossible choices between essentials, and the pervasive anxiety that colors daily life. Their advice might not be about getting rich, but it can be profoundly insightful about staying afloat, identifying true needs, building resilience, and finding value and contentment that isn't tied to income brackets. This perspective is not less valuable. It is valuable in a different, often more foundational way. However, it is also important to be balanced. Simply lacking money does not automatically confer financial omniscience. Someone struggling with debt may have made choices driven by desperation or a lack of information, and their advice might reflect those specific, potentially unhelpful patterns. Their tactical survival skills, while impressive, might not translate into strategic knowledge needed for long-term financial security or growth beyond a certain point. Dismissing the expertise of those who have successfully navigated complex financial systems would also be a form of limiting bias. The millionaire investor does have valuable insights into capital growth that someone focused solely on survival might not. The key is to recognize that financial wisdom is not a monolith owned by a single group. It's a multifaceted understanding that can be gleaned from different life experiences. The question shouldn't be, should people without money be allowed to give financial advice? Everyone is allowed to share their experience and perspective. The more useful questions are, what kind of financial wisdom does someone without conventional wealth likely possess? And am I open to receiving it? To navigate this complexity and avoid our own biases, we need to evaluate financial advice based on its content and context, not solely on perceived financial status of the person offering it. Firstly, identify the type of wisdom. Are they offering strategic advice, how to invest, grow wealth, or tactical/survival wisdom, how to budget on very little, avoid debt traps, build resilience? Be clear on what kind of advice you need and what kind they are offering. Next, consider their lived experience. Does their experience, even if it involves struggle, lend credibility to the specific advice they are giving? Someone who climbed out of massive debt might have invaluable insights into debt management, even if they aren't a millionaire now. Then, evaluate the principles, not just the outcome. Does the advice align with sound financial principles, whether survival focus like rigorous budgeting or growth focus like diversification? Does it make logical sense within your context? Subsequently, be mindful of bias, yours, and acknowledge your own tendency to judge based on wealth. Also, consider their potential biases. Advice born purely from trauma might be overly cautious. Finally, synthesize information. True wisdom often comes from integrating different perspectives. Listen to the wealthy advisor for strategies of accumulation, and listen to the person who navigated scarcity for insights on resilience, essentialism, and the true cause of financial missteps or systemic hurdles. In conclusion, our societal bias leads us to believe that only the wealthy possess valuable financial wisdom. This is a limiting perspective. While strategic wealth-building knowledge often reside with those who have accumulated capital, the trenches of financial struggle forge a different, often brutally honest, kind of wisdom. Expertise in survival, resilience in the face of scarcity, a clear-eyed view of needs versus wants, and a deep understanding of the human cost of financial hardship. Dismissing advice from those without money is a form of bias that can blind us to invaluable lessons about resourcefulness, perseverance, and the true nature of contentment. The most robust financial wisdom might just be the synthesis of lessons learned on the comfortable ascent and in the challenging depths, recognizing that everyone's journey holds potential insight